Hey folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here with you today, and I can see I'm wearing my California shirt, which I mistimed it because I do have a question in the backlog, one of the few I have remaining. I'm actually almost done. That is about whether it's a bad thing to do business in California or not. Like, should you start a business there? Suppose I could pivot and do it today, but I have given that zero thought. I guess a quick preview of that would say, probably not the best, but anyway, that's a topic for another day. So my California shirt aside, I am doing yet another edition of the Freelancer Q&A here from this Airbnb in actually today, not so sunny Arizona, but I hope the light is still good. I use natural light out back here to illuminate my face in these videos. The topic this week is going to be, I scrolled past the thing in my notes. So the question is, if someone offers equity to build their vision, should I run away? And I'll unpack that question a little bit for those of you watching if you're not exactly sure what that means, but I'll get into that. I'll offer my take on it in some detail. So if someone offers you equity to build their vision, should I run away? So the first thing you might be wondering is, what is equity? I'm not assuming any prior knowledge here. I'm sure I've talked about this on a number of occasions before. You might know it from home ownership as a context, like you have equity in your house if, in theory, you owe less money against the loan than you could get by selling the house. That delta is the amount of equity that you have in the house, which means like essentially your ownership stake. In a business, it's actually, I think, a little bit more straightforward in some senses because your equity in a business is the amount of holdings that you have in the business. So if you own shares of Starbucks or Microsoft or something, you have a little bit of equity in that business as a shareholder of a public company. So in general, equity means ownership share in a business. And for you, if you are a layperson and not involved in the what's called private equity market, generally that's only going to be relevant to you in terms of your home or in terms of stocks that you would buy that are publicly traded. What is actually being offered here, if somebody is telling a freelancer, hey, can you help me build this thing? I'll give you equity in exchange for that. What they really mean is, if you kind of partner with me on this business, you can have an ownership share in the thing that we're going to have you build. So generally, the way this is going to come up for most freelancers is if somebody, a buddy of yours or somebody has an idea for a business and they're not capable of building that business. So maybe they're not a programmer or, whatever else, they're not willing to figure out how to program on their own. So they come to you. This is most commonly something that a programmer would be approached about, but maybe other maker disciplines as well. Anyway, this person says, I have an idea for something. They come to you and say, if you build it for me, you can have a stake here. And I am guessing that the person asking this question was approached about building something, a website or whatever. And when the subject of pay came up, it was probably either partially or totally like, oh, well, I don't have any money, but instead you can have a stake in the thing that we would be doing here together. So the question is, if somebody's doing that, should you run away? Generally, I won't bury the lead here. I think it's a pretty good rule of thumb to say, yes, run away from this. You might miss out on some grand opportunity, and I'll get into a little bit of the nuance here in a bit, but if you don't have a lot of time to watch this video, or you're the person who asked the question, I think you can't go wrong by running away. That would definitely be my default. Run away from this, run away fast, don't do it. I don't mean actually if you have usually I think in my experience anyway, this will come up when you have a personal relationship with the person. So if this is your brother-in-law that's saying, hey, I've got this great idea for a beer app. I don't mean actually run away from your brother-in-law and like be rude, but I would say, no, I'm okay. Hard pass, if you will, maybe gently phrased. So that is the default response I would have to an offer like this, unless otherwise proved. The reason I say this is you should think about what's really being proffered here, if you will. So somebody is coming to you and asking for your help in bringing something to market, and they don't have money to pay for it. So what they're really offering is essentially this flyer that, hey, if you do it, I think we'll later make money. And so instead of any money now, What I will give you is hypothetical money later that will result from you building this thing and us selling it, and stuff that may happen down the line. So they are really offering you a hypothetical share in some future upside that has not yet been realized. So that's truly what they're offering, is if this were to succeed, then you will make money. And that's a much different thing than most of what you would run into in the freelance world, which is I will give you actual real money right now for your work, instead of offering you the opportunity to have theoretical and hypothetical future money later. So this is a much higher risk offering, any way you slice it, than actual cash in hand. So with that in mind, it's worth thinking about, who is this person that would make this offer to you. So and if I had dug into this back whenever it was asked, I kind of remember this scenario, but I don't remember enough specifics to remember exactly who we're talking about. And I don't want to speculate anyway. But think about, in general, in this situation, who is this person that would make this offer? So one scenario that comes to mind that I'll lead off with, and maybe hopefully put to bed kind of early, but it's a real one, is huckster. So somebody who wants you to do work for free and is like, oh, yeah, I'll totally give you money later. Now, this could come in a variety of flavors of hucksterism, if you will. So it could be somebody that in theory has money to pay you, and just wants to trick you into doing something for free. It could be somebody that, maybe does have a chance of making some money. So they go into something with you, you build it for free, and maybe they do make money, but then, unless you've signed away all kinds of documents and things, it might be hard to convince them to pay you, and possession might be 9/10 of the law. So it could be somebody who just has no idea what they're doing and won't succeed. Could be somebody who, is trying to get you to do something free instead of paying you, or who will later try to retroactively make it free. And then it could just be, I think probably the most common scenario where you would see this come up is from somebody that has no idea how business works. So I think the most common scenario, I've seen this creep into my Facebook feed from people I went to high school with, multi-level marketing scams, whatever they are, like Amway and things of that nature, where somebody gets roped into some kind of scheme and then they're like, oh, I have a business now and maybe you could build a website for me because I'm totally going to make a lot of money later. Hint, that person's not going to make a lot of money later. So these are the different flavors of huckster. It's somebody who has no capital and is unlikely to have any capital, and or when they do get that capital, will probably screw you out of it. So let's talk about that as a very, very real possibility that you should assess. And then we can move on to scenarios that you'll more likely encounter in the B2B world. You probably, if you're a freelancer and have any corporate experience, would have some sixth sense for the huckster. Usually you're going to get had by hucksters of this nature if you're very new to the workforce or not experienced in B2B. And I don't think that's true of the typical freelancer that would watch this video, but do be aware of that. Does the person have any experience in what they're doing? Is there anything to suggest that they are actually capable of building and executing a business on the back of whatever you are building for them? The next thing that I'll list is probably the most common scenario in which this comes up, and I'll call it the newbie or the idea guy. And this is somebody who isn't a huckster. Maybe they do have that idea for the beer app. Now, it might be a terrible idea that won't make money, but I'm going to draw a distinction here in that your brother-in-law with the beer app, if this were to take off, would probably pay you and do right by you. So this is more of a good faith play. But this is, I used to get this all the time, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know if it's just that I'm walking in different circles in life. It doesn't come up as much anymore, but my goodness, right? Especially like in the few years after the rise of the iPhone and everything, everybody in the world had an idea for an app. And if you are all longtime programmers, I imagine you remember this as well. There's everybody in the world's like, hey, I've got this idea. If you just build it, you can have like a quarter of the money or whatever. And, I can remember saying like, hey, I got 800 ideas of my own. I'm probably just going to do it myself and not share it with somebody if I want to try to make a living of this. I don't need an idea. But this is a common context in which this would come up, is somebody's got an idea and in good faith fashion, they want you to partner up with them and you both make it happen together. Now, to be very clear, if somebody is coming to you with this idea, it's a little bit weird if they're just on Upwork pitching this to random freelancers, that's a little iffy. This is more likely to come up in the context of somebody that knows you and have some faith in your skills or whatever. And you should understand what's really being proposed here is that essentially you become co-founders of a venture. If they're So you would want sizable equity for somebody like something like that. If they're saying, I'll give you like 2% of the profits if you like build the app upon which I'm going to build a business, that's iffy and we're maybe in huckster territory. But more likely what we're talking about is partnership. So do understand that when you're talking about partnership in a business, you need to have and be thinking about things like operating agreements and creating like shareholder and partnership agreements in the business. They're legal things. Now I could create videos explaining all of these things. They're not overwhelmingly complicated, but there is some infrastructure that you need to create there in order to have a business that protects your interests. So this isn't just, something that you should do lightly. If somebody's like, hey, go build this website for me, and you're thinking, I'd probably charge you $100,000, and they're saying, oh, well, I don't have that, so let's just, share whatever profits. Whether that person realizes or not, they're proposing that you become co-founders in a business together and have a significant relationship over the coming years. So if you're not prepared to do that with this person, you should pass. And truly, if you're hanging out your shingle to freelance, this isn't what you're going for. If you were going to do something like this, you should probably, think about like going through a startup incubator or, seeing if you can put your foot in the door of like the venture-backed startup world or something and like do this in earnest, because there are ways to make this happen that aren't just bootstrapping. Or, for you programmers out there, if you want to dip your toe in this water and get a feel for it, you can go check out things like Indie Hackers or whatever, where you do have bootstrappers that are trying to build their businesses. But don't just kind of wander into this without eyes wide open. You're being approached about building a business, and you might just want to be freelancing and earning a paycheck on a gig-based kind of basis. So those are the two probably most common scenarios, and I am guessing what the person asking this question was encountering was the idea guy. There is another one that is maybe a flavor of huckster, but maybe is legit, especially if this is a person that comes to you with an established business that isn't, it's making money. And this might be a penny pincher, so let's say, for instance, that they have an established business that's doing well, like a service-based business. And maybe they're coming to you looking to subcontract work. And if they're not being upfront about that, like, hey, Hit Subscribe could theoretically do something like this, where we're doing a lot of content for clients, but we're also kind of getting into the world of like analytics setup and marketing automation and stuff. If I were to come to you and say, hey, do you want to do some Google Analytics work? And you said, sure, what's, my hourly rate is 100. And I were to say like, oh, well, I don't have that money up front, but when I land a project, I'll totally share the proceeds. So if somebody's coming to you with something like that, that can be legitimate. But if I were coming to you that way, it wouldn't be, do you want some equity? It would be, okay, whatever your terms are, let me know about that. And then I'll let you know if it makes sense to subcontract this work here. So that would really be a different thing. I'm kind of trying to cover all my bases, but it's unlikely that somebody who is offering subcontract work is going to pitch it to you as equity. Maybe what they're talking about is they have some business and they're building a new line of business. They're building something new and they're offering to do what's called profit sharing. So if Hit Subscribe, let's set aside the Google Analytics service work. Maybe I were to come to you and say like, hey, I have this idea that I think we could sell to all of our customers that is kind of like building automation around Google Analytics. And you said, okay, I'd charge you $50,000 to build this out. And I were to say, oh, I don't, once I line up revenue, fine, I could do something like that. But if you want to build it speculatively, I can give you a cut of the first, however much in sales. Now, this would be if I were, I would like to hope most of you watching this think I wouldn't offer you something that was a scam. It would be a good faith offer. I wouldn't call that equity. It would be a form of profit sharing. But if that's what's being proposed to you, then you should get specific about the terms. Number one, it should be sort of a flag that they're calling it equity, because it's not. But if what they're talking about is profit sharing in a future venue, you're really sharing risk together. So they should lay down the terms. Like if I were proposing that to you, I might say, okay, if you build this and I sell it, I will give you, 20% of the proceeds up to $1 million, or I'll give you 80% of the proceeds up to 100,000. and then 20% of the rest or whatever. So it should be terms that you could understand and lay out and then start to reason about, depending on how successful, what your profit would be. And then once those terms were ironed out, then you would probably want to get them down on paper so both parties agree and could take it to adjudication if need be or whatever. Again, this is not equity. It would be some form of profit sharing. You could do it. I would be careful of things that get overly complicated, especially if you are relatively new to freelancing. Yeah, maybe, but probably not. Now, I guess very rarely there is another scenario here, and that would be if you're being approached by somebody with venture backing, meaning like a startup that wants you to be sort of a, first technical hire or technical co-founder, it'll often be called in the space. It would be, again, though, just super weird and unusual if a venture-backed startup came to you and said, I want to offer you equity for a gig. They would come to you and say, do you want to be my technical co-founder? And by the way, I have a seed round of funding worth, $2 million. Those things would be made clear to you. Terms of engagement would be made clear. Now, this is rare for another reason, which is venture-backed company with, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of people who have come to them and said, yes, I have enough faith in you to invest in you. That company is typically not going to be on Upwork looking for freelancers to be co-founders. Their advisors, their investors will be recommending people because of all this money in play. So I guess this is another one that in theory could happen, but it seems super unlikely. But, probably worth mentioning. And those are really all of the scenarios I can think of where somebody would be offering something they call equity to you. And again, I'm covering a lot of bases. I would say 9 times out of 10, at least, we're talking about the idea guy if this is what they're talking about. Like, I want to offer you equity in this business. So as I've run through all of those scenarios, the odds of this being legitimate and reasonable are pretty long. You're working against the fact that a lot of the people who would be most likely to be legitimate wouldn't refer to this as equity or wouldn't go about it in the way that's being presented here. So if somebody is doing it this way, they're probably bumbling through it and their explanation of it if they have a valid use case. If they have an invalid use case, they might be trying to trick you, or they might be inept or completely new to the business world. And again, none of those are really good scenarios. So I guess just in general here, it is hard for me to envision a scenario where somebody comes to a freelancer and says, I don't have any money, or I'm not willing to offer you any money, but I am willing to offer you equity. And that being a good idea for you as a freelancer. The more I talk about it, I don't even know if I can think of a time where I've witnessed something like this be a good idea for the freelancer. I'm coming up empty even in thinking of examples in the past that I could point to. So that's why I say kind of off the cuff, run away. It's probably not a bad bet. And sure, Jim Bob could always have a great idea for an app, and yeah, maybe you're missing out on a home run and you got the FOMO going. The odds of it just aren't likely. If your expected value of this transaction is almost certainly negative. So yes, in theory, you could miss out on something, but more likely you're missing out on something that's on the spectrum somewhere between scam and failure. So I just wouldn't lose any sleep over it. I guess one thing that I'll say here is if you establish yourself as a freelancer and an advisor and a consultant, there is a scenario where I could see this flipping. But again, you wouldn't be approached by people. You would probably be approaching them. And so here's what I mean. If let's say that I retired from Hit Subscribe, sold the business, hired a CEO to run it, and I was just a shareholder, and I had a lot of time on my hands, and I'm thinking about the second half of my career, I would probably do a mix of advisory work, investing, and consulting, me personally, meaning I wouldn't be looking to do services or kind of grindy stuff. Instead, I would probably flip this around. And if a company came to me like a venture-backed startup or just, some bootstrap company, if they came to me and said, hey, would you be willing to do some work for us? Maybe you can consult for a few $1,000s a month or whatever. What I would most likely say in the back half of my career is, I don't really want your service-based money. I'm not looking to do that anymore. I'll tell you what, why don't I hook on as an advisor with you and I'll learn about your business and this is free. And And then if I see a path to me materially helping you, let's talk about an arrangement where I come into the business as a consultant for equity. And the reason I would want to do this is because as you get to the back half of your career, especially as a business owner, if I think about, like, I have a controlling interest. Well, I mean, if you think about my wife and I, we own entirely outright Hit Subscribe, which has like monetary worth. So that's a part of our long-term portfolio. And I'm starting to do actually just got an email about this today. I'm a limited partner in a fund. So I'm doing investment in other businesses in the non-public realm. So what I would want for the back half of my career is to build up more and more equity in more diversified businesses as, a retirement play, in essence, to become independently wealthy. So the reason I'm mentioning all of that is there is a world where, as you build up more of an interest in more equity businesses, that what you would be much more interested in is continuing to diversify and grow the portfolio of businesses you have an interest in, rather than, getting $5,000 to do some consulting or whatever. So there is a world where an indie will accept equity, but I would imagine this is going to be pretty rare for freelancers, especially if the basis of your business is that you're mainly looking for cash flow. Which I wouldn't be in this hypothetical scenario where I was retired and living off dividends from my business interest in Hit Subscribe. Their cash flow isn't interesting. What's interesting is growing my portfolio. So I don't see this being likely early on, but if you do have interest in some businesses and you're more of a consultant than a freelancer, then you might think of flipping this around and kind of betting on yourself and saying, look, I want to get to know this business. And I think I can make the right kinds of introductions and give the right kind of leadership advice and advisory stuff. And maybe even a little of building up your content portfolio, or, building some prototype that you take to the next round of investment, whatever you're doing there. If you are coming on for equity, you're essentially betting on yourself. And you're betting that your contribution to an early business can, 10 or 100x it long term, in which case you are betting on yourself to really, significantly expand your own investment by coming in for an interest in the business. And that's a much different thing than the idea guy with the beer app saying, can you build the entire thing for me? You are essentially flipping that script and saying, hey, guy with the beer app, let me kind of learn about what you're thinking and what you're doing here. And if over the long haul I see any potential in this, then I will propose something to you where I take an ownership share and I lay out a plan for how I think we could really make your business take off. So that sort of advisory stuff requires you to have a lot of experience, probably as a consultant, probably as a CEO or C-star of some nature in a business, and or a lot of advisory experience with businesses. But you need to have some at-bats and some confidence that you can take a look at a business plan and an early stage business and contribute to in a way that just absolutely helps it take off. And that's not an easy thing. That takes a lot of experience. So I did think it was worth mentioning that AP piece, just in case some of you out there are thinking of, maybe I would want equity in the business. Yeah, that can be a valid play. But if you don't know a whole lot about equity in a business, somebody's just pitching their business to you and they don't have the cash to pay you. So instead they're giving you a share, 40, 50, 20, whatever percent of nothing is still nothing. You are going to be doing that advisory equity type play. If the business has worth of some kind, whether it's that it's bootstrapped and it's profitable, or a lot of people with a lot of investment experience have poured money into it, there is money there. Unlike your brother-in-law's beer app, there's no money. Nobody's interested. Nobody's betting on it, etc. So use that as kind of a benchmark if you are in this intermediate to advanced world of maybe going in for equity plays. Someone somewhere, probably other than you, should think this is worth something before you start spending any time. And when you spend that time with it, you should probably spend that time gratis at first to try to evaluate whether you want to get involved enough with that to have equity, and then whether you think your contribution can make the business take off. If you're not in that intermediate to advanced scenario, again, just run away. That's the safest bet. I suppose if you're the one that asked me this question, or just anyone wondering, and you have a very specific scenario that you think I might not have addressed, happy to field it. And, maybe I'm wrong or overlooking something, but yeah, run away. So hopefully that helps, and I will catch you all next time.